Spring Showcase deep dive, offense, defense. Who stood out? What have we noticed different schematically? I got a pro on the show today, plus big picture thoughts on the Badgers. Are they better than last year? Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings. Thank you for being an everydayer, for making this your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today's episode, we are diving into the spring showcase deep dive, offense, defense, what specifically stood out after talking about it and thinking about it, plus big picture thoughts. We got Wisconsin royalty joining the show. Curtis Holland, the playmaker on the Discord. Now, let's start with football. You were there. I was there. Or start with quarterbacks, I should say. You were there. I was there. We talked about it. We thought about it. What stood out to you in the quarterback room?
I think there was just a level of confidence and control in the offense. The offense, and we'll get into this, the offense still has a lot of kinks to iron out. It's by no way ready. If we were to enter a season tomorrow, I would be very, very concerned. That said, I think both quarterbacks, at least Billy Edwards and Danny O'Neal, they both were incredibly competent. They knew when to tuck it and run and not force a pass that maybe wasn't there. They were leaders. You could see it in their body language, how they talked to the players on the field, how, when it was time to stick their head and get some extra yards, they would be willing to do that. I think the thing that was interesting to me was that a number of plays would be called dead just by contact. Quarterback in practice, you don't want to hit them. But I think that in a game or in, maybe a real situation, they probably would have either broken out or got an extra 5 or 6 yards on a scramble. So overall, I thought I saw a lot of confidence. I saw a lot of leadership, which I think is big and something that I think is going to be very valuable for this team.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I'm going to give you a buy or seller because this is something I've said a couple times, but I don't think I've specifically asked you. I think, and you're going to buy or sell this, I think the Badgers got better at the 1, the 2, and the 3 in their quarterback room from last year. It's early, but you buy or sell that?
Yeah, I'm gonna buy it. I mean, I know we only saw a little bit of Tyler Van Dyke. Both Billy Edwards and Van Dyke have, sort of a veteran presence about them. I mean, they know, when to throw a ball, when not to throw a ball. That was something that I think was pretty obvious from Saturday. But I just when I watch Billy Edwards play, I mean, you can see the energy, the swagger he plays with. It's just something we haven't seen really since Mordecai, or even before that, since someone like a Jack Cohn. And then you look at O'Neal. O'Neal probably has about the same arm as Locke, maybe a little bit better, but it's. You wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. But the thing that's different with him is he's incredibly quick, incredibly fast. I forgot who I was saying this to, but he reminds me a lot actually of the mobility of Mordecai. I think that he's kind of that same size. He's kind of that same quick, kind of jump cut, move quick, run around, got some good straight line speed. So, picture Locke, but like also able to move on the run, pick up some first downs with his feet. And like I said, he's quick. He can get to that down line quickly. And then you look at Carter Smith. I think Carter Smith, it's very clear he's still a freshman. So he was making some freshman mistakes, some freshman plays. That said, he's got some zip on the ball. He's got a great pass. He's also incredibly mobile. And he's a big, strong dude, kind of like maybe a little bit more mobile than Mabry was. And so, he made some mistakes. He threw a big pick where it was clearly just a bad freshman throw. But outside of that, again, you see a little bit of that moxie, that kind of the intangibles that I know Fickle really emphasized wanting to get in their quarterbacks of the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Danny O'Neal, like the comp I made is if you take Braden Locke and then just put him in a little sports car, that's basically what he is. Like he's very similar stature, very similar arm strength. I think you're dead on, but he can move and he can make plays with his feet. And as a backup quarterback, you can do way worse than that. I thought they looked pretty well. And I thought Billy Edwards Jr., although didn't have the best game necessarily, the best practice, I thought he still moved the sticks. He moved the chains, made some good throws on third down, showed the ability to move the pocket. I just think we talked about it so much, man. What you had last year, I think this year's room gets you into the middle of the pack in the Big Ten. It's not a star-studded group. Like Billy Edwards is not going to be a first or second round pick, but I think it gets you in a spot where you have a quarterback that can make plays for you on third down and can win a game for you potentially.
Yeah, and the way I would look at it is kind of like this. I mean, I look at Billy Edwards and I think of it's similar to what Minnesota and Iowa had last year at quarterbacks. It's not anything that's going to light you up or make it crazy. And Billy Edwards is by far a better passer than Iowa's quarterback. But in terms of the leadership and in terms of what they bring to the offense, keeping drives alive, motivating their guys, like the intelligence and good decision making, like that's what we need. It's like that level of confidence. You feel like, all right, Billy's here, he's going to lead us in this drive. We're going to be able to make stuff happen. That's sort of what we have now, and that's unfortunately more or less what we've been missing for stints in the last 2 years.
All right, let's go back and forth on this. Something you liked about the offense. We're going to do something you liked and something that concerns you that you saw in the spring showcase. Let's start with something you liked that you saw in the spring showcase.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I liked about the offense is, well, it's twofold. One, it's clear that it's a system, right? So it's something that'll build on itself as a game goes on, just like any other wide zone offense. So, it's clear that they have different looks built into each play that they can, utilize as the game goes on. But the main thing I wanted to highlight is just that they're very, very good at getting themselves in advantageous situations in which they put the defense at a disadvantage. Case in point, there were a number of plays in which you see, guys maybe line up outside the numbers and then motion across the field to set up and then, send another tight end in motion and get someone on a sweep where now you have two tight ends in space, a tackle and a guard going out against two corners and an outside linebacker, right? So it's just leverage like that where you're going away from maybe the strength of the defense or maybe where we're a little bit struggling right now with some O-line movement and get us into a spot where we can have the advantage. Even if, we're playing a team like an Ohio State or a Michigan, you still get two tight ends and a tackle on some secondary players. Like you're going to have an advantage in that situation. So that's some of the things that I really liked to see from our offense.
I love that. It feels like schematically we're gonna create some advantages where maybe in Longo's offense it was more about the players needing to create those advantages individually. It feels like we're gonna take a step up from the X's and O's standpoint there. I'd say the receiver room, right? Vinny Anthony, I thought looks like he looks like he did last year, but even a little better.
Yeah,
Jamie
Vinny Anthony is
Ballard,
the clear number one to me, just watching that game.
yeah, he's I think he's going to be really good. And then you flank him with Ballard. We saw Joseph Griffin make a nice play in that game, make a couple nice plays. Chris Brooks played quite a bit. Tyrell Henry showed some quickness. And this is without even having Tretch Kekahuna out there. Eugene Hilton showed flashes. I think this receiver room is really good. It's really underrated. I don't know if there's a star there, but I think there's a lot of like BB plus type players and good fits for the scheme as well. With the Chris Brooks, who's going to come in and he's going to be physical. He's going to come down and crack back on a defensive end. I think it's a really versatile, good receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think, from an athletic perspective, I can't think of many other wide receiver rooms that we've had in the last 10 years or so that can match this. I mean, I think about the year we had with Quintez Cephas again, and this is kind of the theme. Like, we don't have an elite high-end guy like a Quintez Cephas, and we don't have running backs that are like a Jonathan Taylor or a Braylon Allen, but we have guys that on the whole are strong, athletic, fast, quick, can play the position well. It's just solid across the board. And we'll see. Maybe this season a couple people break out and really step into that superstar role for us. But yeah, I would echo that sentiment. I think Anthony's number one. I think Ballard, you can use him as a runoff or take the top off defenses. They used him on a couple sweeps in which he's got a lot of speed. Brooks was interesting to me. I think I'd mentioned before, but he kind of felt like he was playing a hybrid tight end receiver role. He played a lot, and it didn't really seem like he was in the same rotation as like an Anthony or a Ballard was in. It seemed like he was playing almost a different role. So it'll be interesting to see how we use him more as the season goes on and if his role continues to be as much as it was. But yeah, overall, I do feel like this is a good receiver room to complicate a run game focused offense.
And shout out JB in the Discord, some Chris Brooks love here. I think to your point, just to take it a step further, there's receivers that can do a lot of different things in this room. And if you look back at some of the past rooms, it's maybe been you maybe haven't had that deep burner or you haven't had a physical receiver. I think you have a physical guy in Brooks. You have a couple burners in Ballard and Vinny. You have a couple slot guys in Tretch and Tyrell Henry. And then you have just kind of a big-bodied red zone guy in Griffin. They're not all going to play. It's not all going to work. You're not going to go 5-6 deep. But I do think, and Eugene Hilton I didn't even mention, who can play, I think, slot or boundary. I think you just have a really unique mix of versatile weapons, which a guy like Grimes is going to be able to use, and it's going to help keep defenses off balance a little bit. I think that mix is really good. All right, we're going to take one quick second here for our friends of the show. We're going to come back and talk about something that concerned us on offense. I've got one specifically, and I know Curtis does as well. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick break for our friends of the show over at Monarch Money. If you ever lose track a little bit of where your money's going, maybe some money leaks, I call them, which for me could be the runs to the gas station to get some beer and maybe some nachos, whatever it is. You have to get Monarch Money to help keep track of your finances. And it acts as a CFO for you. It's a dashboard to bring all your money, all your financial stuff into one spot where you can set goals, you can track your progress, you can be collaborative with your partner. It is a really important thing to track your money and your finances. We all work hard for our money. Let's do a better job of taking care of it. Let's be a better caretaker for our funds and our finances. That's what Monarch Money is here to help you do. Instead of juggling multiple apps, Monarch will bring everything together, track spending, and even long-term goals that'll help you get there as well. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Okay, let's jump back into this. Curtis, give me something on offense you walked away from saying, man, that needs some more work. I know you mentioned in general the whole thing needs reps, which makes sense. Grimes it's his first year here. There's new quarterbacks, there's new pieces, but maybe specifically something that stood out to you as a concern potentially.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned it. I mean, my biggest takeaway leaving the game was that we just have a ways to go in terms of incorporating this offense. Like, we are not ready for a game anytime soon. And the good news is it's spring still. So, you have another, 4 or 5 months to kind of get some things ironed out, do some walkthroughs outside of practice. And then when fall camp, make sure we get the reps and rep the plays that we're strong and we feel confident in. But the main thing that stood out for me is that the loss of Kevin Haywood, and I don't know if this is your take too. I mean, it's a pretty common take right now, but it's noticeable. I think that's the main thing that, to me, I felt really good about the O-line kind of coming into the spring and potentially going into next year. But losing Kevin Haywood, I think, opens up a lot of concern because you still had a guard position you had to work through as well. And with that position being open, with Haywood being open, the left side of the line right now is a little bit of a spot that we need to work some things out. And you kind of see that when you were watching the game. You could see that's where a lot of the pressure was coming from, either from up the middle on the left side or it was coming from outside. One of the tackles getting beat. And so that's something to me that's definitely concerning when it comes to the offense. But just to kind of caveat this as well, as I said before, I think Grimes does a really good job of scheming away from our weaknesses. Whereas Longo might have just been, screw it, we're going to throw face into the fire. We're going 4 deep into a cover 4 zone because that's just how we roll. Grimes is like, all right, let's not go into the teeth of the defense where we're not strong right now. Let's go to the outside. Let's try to run off the other tackle. Let's run some play action in which we're getting guys out of position. So that's something that I feel, at least from an X's and O's and scheming perspective, we're trying to scheme ourselves out of our weakness. But it's still definitely there, and it's definitely something that's concerning.
You're not wrong. Longo had a bit of just a YOLO mentality with calling plays. Like, we're just going to keep trying it. That must have been the easiest.
Iowa just sat in cover 2 for the entire game against us in the second quarter on, and it was just like, I don't know when they you could literally see in their DBs, like, are they just going to keep doing the same stuff? Like, all right, so.
That must have been the easiest game plan for Iowa to put together ever. And at some point, they must have been like, are they baiting us? Like, they're going to hit us with something different here? But nope, same thing every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's the offensive line. And you go to that Haywood one specifically, and you're maybe replacing them with a Leighton Nelson. Who knows? They're still looking at some guys in the portal. There's a couple guys on the roster that maybe could end up being in that spot. But Leighton Nelson is a guy who didn't play last year, missed all of last year with an injury, came over from Vanderbilt, never started at Vanderbilt. He played. But that's not really a plug and play option that you're going to feel great about when you look at the defensive lines that Wisconsin has to play this year. I think you and I both think we're going to get into defense next. I think you and I both think the defense is better. I think it's going to be more stout. This is still not an Alabama defensive line. It's still not a Ohio State defensive line. It's still not an Oregon defensive line that you're going to have to play. And there were times where, again, it's not completely fair. I'm not judging Leighton Nelson based on one practice in spring, but there were times where he really struggled on the edge. There were times where we struggled, as you mentioned before we got on here, up the middle. And we're going to be playing really good defensive lines this year. I think the offensive line is definitely a concern. It'll get better. I'm not going to kill them right now because they're still adjusting to the lost mid-spring practice of Kevin Haywood, who's a starter, so they're shuffling pieces. But they got to get better there. And it's a potential concern all year long because even if you go to the portal, there's not great veteran depth along that offensive line as well. So I'm right there with you. I think that's the big concern I have for this offense.
Yeah.
I
don't have much else to add to that. I mean, I agree.
If you had anything else to add on to there, but I think you and I are in the same boat there. Let's shift defense. Let's shift to something you took away that you liked or you feel encouraged about with the defensive side here.
Yeah, I think just overall the energy they played with. The last few times we'd watched Wisconsin play, you saw sort of the defense start to collapse, the energy. They just look flat, for kind of the rest of the season, and obviously getting beat pretty bad in our last few games is going to do that to you. So, just watching them kind of fly around, fly to the ball, swarm the ball. The linebackers especially played with a lot of speed. I thought Tackett Curtis looked much better than he did last year. Much faster, much more athletic, much more active. Allegro was a blur too. I mean, he was moving to the ball, and so I thought that was better. Overall, I thought the defensive front, was. Here's how I want to caveat this, because I think a lot of people are going to take these words and mix them up. When our defensive line played at the best it could last year, it's probably about the same caliber that our defensive line at the best it can play this year. The difference is we can sustain that level of play for a whole game now with the people we have. So think about the best our defensive line was last year. Not super great, but it was, it wasn't terrible. We were in some of the games with Penn State and Oregon for a while. But then now, instead of us falling apart in the second half or falling apart against Iowa, you can sustain that effort for the whole game now. That's more or less my takeaway with the defensive line.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. I think it's reasoned. I'll go to linebacker athleticism. You hit on Allegro and Tackett a little bit. Now, some of this is going to play up because I think you would have saw more linebacker athleticism last year if the defensive line was better through 4 quarters of keeping people off those linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going to be better there, which is going to allow that athleticism to play up. But you mentioned Tackett. I thought he looked sideline to sideline. They had a really nice tackle near the right or left sideline in a red zone situation, one-on-one. I thought he looked good. Tackett looked good. But Sebastian Cheeks also looked good. Got some burst off the edge. Nicholas Clayton looked good. Got some burst off the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Fearby is an athlete, even though he's more of a front 7 guy. And Turner had a really nice hit. Cooper Catalano made a couple plays. I just think the athleticism overall at linebacker spot, which is still going to be welcoming in a Mason Posa, who might be one of the better athletes in that group as well.
It's true. I
thought that. Yeah, he's coming in too. Now, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think he's going to play this year just because that depth at that inside spot is going to be tough to crack. But I think that the overall athleticism at the linebacker spot is better. And I also think that defensive line and that front 7 is going to allow it to play up this year. Whereas last year, it just didn't at times because offensive linemen were mauling those
guys were getting pushed on the linebackers. The one thing I'll say, I thought the linebackers filled the gaps a lot better, specifically the ones. I thought, the offensive line was able to make gaps in the run game. It wasn't like they were incompetent. They were able to, make some holes. And I thought the linebackers did a really good job of filling those holes. And that's something I don't know if I saw all the way from last year. There was a couple runs where Jones was able to break past the line and then just got met in the hole by a Tackett or an Allegro. And it was a hard meeting, So I think that there was, I think that was something that was encouraging there as well.
Give me something that, again, I don't want to say concern, but something that you walked away from saying, I'm not so sure about that spot of the defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the front 7. I mean, the defensive line, again, I think it's improved in terms of now we have a number of guys. It's going to be much harder for teams to just run on us the whole game. We got some guys with some attitude and some edge to them. That said, on the high-end side, we're still lacking really, truly high-end defensive line talent. And that's going to show up against a team like a Michigan or an Ohio State or an Alabama. You're going to see that. It's still going to be a fight. I think we're going to be in these games more than we would have been last year. But it's still going to be a game in which we are definitely outmanned, and it's going to be tough for us to really be able to affect that offense in the way that we need to in order to win those games. And then you look at the secondary. Again, I thought the secondary played really, really well on Saturday, but they're still limited. I mean, you're still going to have a guy like Ryan Williams or a Jeremiah Smith run right past them. Yeah, I mean, I have zero illusion that they're going to be able to stick one-on-one with those kind of guys. And the key is, can we get to the quarterback that disrupts the play? And so that's where those games are going to be won and lost. And it's tough to tell right now because we're practicing against ourselves. We know our weaknesses, we know our strengths, and we're not those guys. And so we'll see how well our defense scales against some of the better competition. But I do think they're going to have more depth. I do think they're going to be stingy and they're going to keep us in games much longer than they would have last season.
Yeah, I really like that where you went, because I was actually going to ask you a follow-up question and you kind of led into it. Who are the stars on this defense, and are there stars? I think Christian Allegro potentially. And I think you look in the secondary, maybe Ricardo Hallman, maybe Nazir Forkrin even. But I think you're right on. And it's similar to me to the quarterback conversation where going from 16th in the Big Ten in passer rating last year to if we can get middle of the pack this year, that's a big deal. I think we're getting that front 7 to the middle of the pack in the Big Ten. But I don't know if there's 2 or 3 guys in that front 7 that are going to keep opposing offensive coordinators up at night. That are going to consistently beat really good offensive tackles and guards one-on-one to get pressure on the quarterback without blitzing. Am I
It's
crazy on that?
definitely going to be a team effort this year. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like one guy that disrupts your whole defense. You got a game plan for. It's got to be, you know, everybody doing their job at a high level. And I think, and again, I think you can do that. I think there was moments in the scrimmage too where you saw, yeah, like this front is much better than they were. They are able to string out plays to the sidelines that way they would have gotten, you know, maybe closed on in previous games. They weren't just getting run over. And when guys got tired, they cycled them through. When it comes to superstars, I mean, I think you'll see another Elijah Hills. I think you'll see maybe, you know, that in a Parker Peterson, or maybe I can't remember. Everybody's Perkins. You'll see. I think you'll see some of that. You know, some guys that can really step up. And I don't think we'll be in the 130s of tackles for losses this year. But that said, you know, even if we cross over the 100 mark, we're still, you know, in the lower half of the country. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to change, because while I do feel like this team would, in a previous Big Ten West season, be more than capable of winning a Big Ten West title, you know, we're playing Alabama, we're playing Ohio State, we're playing Michigan, we're playing Oregon, we're playing an Indiana team that all of a sudden is really good. We're playing an Illinois that returns everybody. So it's not necessarily like there's a lot of opportunity for us to really, you know, stack those numbers up. So, you know, like I said, I think this defense is going to be a lot more of a team effort. I think it's going to be a much improved defense from last year. But in terms of, like, you know, next level high end, you know, it's still going to be limited.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I'm right there with you on that one. We're going to take a quick break, come back. A couple players that stood out, plus big picture. Let's just get right to it. Is this team better than last year? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. First, a quick second, friends of the show, and a quick second to say thank you for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. Always awesome when we get Curtis on the show. Let's jump into it, man. Give me a couple players that people aren't talking about. I think people have talked a lot about Dylan Jones. They've talked a lot about Ballard. They've talked a lot about Perkins, etc. Give me a couple guys that stood out to you in spring that people maybe aren't talking about.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jack Snaker. I think he's a guy that a lot of people haven't really talked about. They've said, well, he's switch a tight end, you know, whatever. And I think that's just not really good assessment of him. He's a fullback. He's playing a fullback. He's playing an H-back when he's not playing fullback. He's not lined up on the line. He's not doing tight end routes. He's a fullback. And he got a lot of play. They used him a lot in the game. They used him as a lead blocker in the I formation, which they used a lot of I formation. They used him in the screen game. They used him as a guy coming across, you know, as a motion guy to, you know, do the split flow block. Like, so they used him in fullback dive. And he's a guy that, like I said, he gets ahead of steam going and he's in space. He's going to get you 10 yards because he's fast. So he's a guy who I think is going to have a big impact this year. Kind of be the jackknife, kind of be the special player, you know, the Austin Ramish or the Alex Ingold, you know, the guy that they're going to need to really help this offense work all the way.
I think that's a really good one. It's funny with Ager, he's kind of come full circle, right? Coming in as a PC guy, Wisconsin, going to play fullback. Then this new thing happens. He's going to be
he was recruited as a tailback originally.
Yeah.
And then I think that's when Braylon Allen became running back, and the joke was Braylon Allen was bigger than the fullback. So, you know.
He was. You know, and it's kind of come full circle for him. I think he's right back to that kind of versatile offensive piece that a guy like Paul Chris would have loved. I think that's a good one. I'll give you another one on the running back room. I think getting Natuka looked good. Yeah, redshirt freshman. He's young. He's not going to play a lot this year, barring injuries, which we certainly don't hope don't happen. But he looks a little quicker, a little more compact. I think he's almost like an automatic 5 to 8 yards when you give him the ball at times. I think going forward, that's a player that could settle in really nicely as like a number 2 running back on a good Wisconsin team. Probably not your number 1 guy, but a nice player. I would say him. And then Tyrell Henry's another guy that I don't know where he's going to play. You and I both talked about the receiver room. Tretch is coming back. He's going to be the number 1 slot. But I think Tyrell's looked really good. He's looked really good all spring. And he gives you something interesting in the return game. And he's give you something interesting from just a quickness, kind of explosive standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, Tyrell was solid, and you could see how they want to use their slots and how they want to use their guys like Tretch. I mean, it's a Deebo Samuel role from San Francisco. I mean, that's more or less the offense we're running. So you see them in sweeps, you see them in screens, you see them in quick game, and I think that's going to be a role that's especially suited for both Tretch and the other guy that wasn't in the game at all was Dupree. I think you're going to see him kind of doing some of that work too. So it'll be interesting to see how they work Tyrell Henry in there. But yeah, overall, you know, I thought he played well. And before that, I'm drawing a blank. Who did you mention before Henry?
Oh, I went back to getting Natuka.
So not a lot of people are going to get this. They're going to catch this sort of reference. But when Monty Ball was a freshman in 2008, he got a little bit of play time. Atuka reminds me of a slightly faster Monty Ball at that stage in his career. He wasn't, when he was playing as a freshman, sophomore, he really wasn't what we know Monty Ball as today. He had a long ways to go, but he's a guy who, bided his time, worked hard, worked at the grinded every day, played behind a John Clay, played behind a James White for a time. And finally, when he had his opportunity, he capitalized on it. And that's kind of what Atuka reminds me of. Like he's a guy who he's got some talent, he's got some skill, he's a little bit more of a stocky kind of back. And I think that he has the potential if he keeps working, he keeps improving, he can have a career trajectory similar to that of a Monty Ball.
Yeah, he's really unique because he's one of those guys that's kind of good at a lot of things. I feel like he's going to have good power, good speed, good quickness, good balance. Not elite anywhere necessarily, but Monte Ball wasn't elite in a lot of spots.
That's what Monty. Yeah, I was gonna say that's what Monty Ball was.
Yeah.
I mean, he started as a pure power back, just a big bowling ball kind of dude. Didn't really have good feet, and then he worked at it. He got quicker feet. He got better at making cuts, and then obviously he got on a couple of really great offenses where he was able to shine in those roles. And like I said, I see Atuka. He has that potential. Will he be Monty Ball? I mean, that's a bold thing to say. I have no idea, but I do think he's got that type of talent, or that type of skill at least.
I like the upside there. I really liked what I saw. All right, let's end it with this penultimate question here, man. Are we better than last year?
So, it's when you look at last year, there was a lot of things that went into why we were what we were, and there was moments where you could see potential, and then there were moments where obviously we played worse than I think we've played in the last 20 years. So it was an interesting sort of thing. I would say that on the whole, this team is a better team than last year's team was. In terms of top end potential, I would probably say it's similar in terms of we had opportunities to beat a Penn State. We had opportunities to beat an Oregon last year. And for various reasons, we didn't, right? And so in terms of the top end potential of our team, I could see us being in a game against an Oregon where it's, 13-13 in the fourth, or a game against, an Ohio State where it's, 17-14 Ohio State in the fourth. I can see that being the case, right? But it's still tough to predict us to beat those teams just based on the talent gap alone. That said, I do feel like when we play the teams like the Iowas, the Minnesotas, the Washingtons, I think you're going to start to see where our younger new talent is going to outshine the talent that they have. My question is, and I posed this in the Discord yesterday, I think that the talent Fickle and them have brought in is much better than our former Big Ten West contemporaries. The problem is they're sophomores and freshmen right now, right? Yeah. Is their talent enough to overcome the experience gap a team like an Iowa or a Minnesota is going to have on us? Can we overcome that gap with just the talent alone? And that's something that I don't know right now. I do feel much more confident going into this season than I did going into last season. I know I kind of was very high on a lot of the things we saw sort of going into last year. But if I was being honest with myself, there were definitely some questions, especially with Tyler Van Dyke, in terms of what we could do from an offensive perspective. This year, there's the voice in the back of my head are just saying that, the lines of scrimmage need some work. And I think, when we play some of the better teams, it's going to become obvious to everybody watching. But that said, I think even with that being the case, we'll be better suited to beat a team like an Iowa, like a Minnesota, like an Indiana, like an Illinois. And I think that's going to allow us to be a better team overall.
Yeah, I think it's a safer team. So safer in terms of, I think the floor is higher in a lot of places. You look at the running game last year, you had Ches and Tywee. I think this running back room is better. I think the quarterback play is slightly better. I think the defensive line is stouter. I think the secondary is still veteran. I just think it's a safer team. I don't think the ceiling, to your point, is a ton higher. I don't. I think 8 wins is the ceiling on this team, and that's if things go pretty well. But I do think this team is better. I don't think they're going to get beat 42-10. I think the depth is in the trenches is stronger. Now, there are spots on the team where you look at the depth at offensive line, at running back, tight end now. There are some spots that you start to get a little dicey. But I do think in general, at some of the key spots that were a bugaboo last year, I think this team is better. Quarterback, defensive line, running back, receiver. So, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable saying I think they're better. I don't think it's dramatic.
I also think, and I'll say this too, I also think there's just more leadership on this team. I think there's in terms of the X factors of something like a Billy Edwards or even a Daniel Neal brings to the table when they're running an offense, or, some of the guys in the defensive room, they were tired of getting, ran over last year. And so they have some things to prove. And you're seeing that even from some of the transfers. I mean, we haven't even talked about Mason Rieger. He's posting these videos like, I'm going to the NFL. You're not going to stop me, right? So if he comes in and we get a fraction of what he's capable of, I mean, that's going to be a huge impact, right? So there's still opportunity on this team in which I see things going well for us. But again, it's just, based on what we've seen so far and based on kind of where our team is at and whatnot, and then just projecting that against this murderous row of a schedule, it's tough to really predict us to be as good as some of the Wisconsin teams of old. Now, I will say this. I made this caveat in the Discord as well. If we were going into a Big Ten West season, I'd feel very confident in saying we were a contender, if not someone who could outright win the conference in the West this year. That's what I feel about this team. The struggle, like I said, is it's the impact of playing the really, really good, talented teams week after week after week after week. Your depths get tested. I mean, Brian Smith talked about it last time we had him on. It's, you might be able to upset one of those teams, but can you do it after you play 4 of them? That's where it's tough.
You're going to have that 4-game stretch, man, that are just all physical, mauling teams. And Wisconsin nominally is that as well, but you're going to get some body blows there. And then you're still going to have to finish up with a Minnesota and an Illinois and an Indiana. Like, that's brutal, man.
It's just a lot. And it's a lot of physicality, a lot of hitting. The good news is, and I said this leaving the spring game on Saturday, this is the first team that really feels like a Wisconsin team, under Fickell. Like, leaving that team, I'm like, this is about as Wisconsin as any team I've ever seen in my life. So, you're going to get what you want, Badger fans. This is Wisconsin. So, we'll see how it all goes.
Curtis, man, as always, dude, I appreciate you. For everyone tuning in, thank you for this. As always, thank you for supporting the show, watching the show. Definitely come back later this week. We got some more guests coming up on Wisconsin, and we will talk later.